Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of A Dark Cup of History, where we delve into the dark, spooky and disturbing side of history during this whole month of October, or Spooktober.
Nice.
Yeah, enjoy that. That's the niceness you'll get in this episode.
This is as happy as it is. Here we now switch.
Yes.
Today's episode is possibly one of the darkest we've ever covered, and we've done some doozies.
Yeah.
And it does come with disclaimers and trigger warnings for sexual assault, torture, murder, paedophilia, necrophilia, and listener discretion is very much advised. Also, if you have coulrophobia, which Emily does, then that should also be a trigger warning. And if that doesn't give away what or who we're going to be looking at, we will be looking into the life and death and all the horror in between of John Wayne Gacey, the killer clown.
So, grab a glass of something strong, take a deep breath, and turn off if you have to. We honestly understand. And let's get dark.
We're going to start from the beginning of his life and his childhood, which wasn't a nice one. But we want to start by saying that we in no way condone anything he did at all.
Mm-mm.
But there are some circumstances that led themselves to a possible explanation to his personality. Explains doesn't excuse.
Yes, absolutely. On the 17th of March in 1942, it was St. Patrick's Day, and the Irish-born Americans, John Wayne Gacey Sr. and Marion Elaine Robinson Gacey, welcomed their first son into the world at the Edgware Hospital in Chicago. John Wayne Gacey Jr. was the second of three children. His older sister, Joanne, was born 2 years before him, and 2 years later came his younger sister, Karen. All of the Gacey children were raised Catholic, and all three attended Catholic schools where they lived on the northern side of Chicago.
His father was an auto repair machinist and a World War I veteran, and his mother was a homemaker. Gacey was close to his mother and his two sisters, but had a difficult relationship with his alcoholic father, who was verbally and physically abusive to his family. He would beat John and his two sisters with a razor strap if they were perceived to have misbehaved. The elder Gacey frequently belittled his son, calling him dumb and stupid and comparing him unfavourably with his sisters. One of Gacey's earliest childhood memories was of his father beating him at the age of 4 for accidentally disarranging some car engine components. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's abuse, which resulted in accusations that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who was probably growing up queer.
Yeah, there is going to be some language used in this that we wouldn't use today, but it was what was said a lot in the 60s.
Yeah.
And is come from Gacey's own, not memoirs, but his confession tapes and stuff.
Yeah.
The neighbourhood in which Gacey grew up was middle class, and it was not uncommon for young boys to take on part-time jobs after school. Although he was not a particularly popular kid in school, he was liked by his teachers and co-workers and had made some friends in school and in his Boy Scout troop. He always remained active with other children and thoroughly enjoyed outdoor scouting activities. Gacey seemed to have a very normal childhood, with the exception of his relationship with his father and a series of accidents that affected him.
Gacey's psychosexual history began between the ages of 6 and 10, when a teenage daughter of one of his mother's friends reportedly undressed and played with him. It's also said that Gacey himself was molested at a young age by a family friend and contractor. Gacey never told his father, afraid that his father would blame him. Despite their challenging relationship, Gacey loved his father, but felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. In 1949, Gacey's father whipped him after he and another boy were caught sexually fondling a young girl.
Yeah. So it starts off quite strong from the off, this story.
Yeah.
Gacey was an overweight and unathletic child, and because of a heart condition, he was told to avoid sports. When Gacey was 11 years old, he was playing by a swing set when he was hit in the head by one of the swings. The accident caused a blood clot in his brain. However, this blood clot was not discovered until he was 16, which could explain some behavioural changes in him at that time.
Oh, absolutely. Any kind of brain impact can have, no matter how slight.
And because of this, from the ages of 11 to 16, he suffered a series of blackouts caused by the clots, and yet the blackouts did cease when he was given medication to dissolve the blockage in his brain. Again, in 1957, he was hospitalized for a burst appendix. Gacey later estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he spent almost a year in hospital, and he attributed the decline of his grades to missing all of this school.
Also, two big what if moments. Like, what if the clot hadn't been found and it killed him? What if his appendix had killed him?
There's even bigger what ifs that happen later on.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
At the age of 17, Gacey was diagnosed with a non-specific heart ailment. He was hospitalized on several occasions for this problem throughout his life, but they were not able to find an exact cause for the pain he was suffering. However, although he complained frequently about his heart, especially after his arrest, he never suffered any serious heart attack. Gacey's medical condition was never conclusively diagnosed. His father suspected he was malingering, openly accusing his son of faking as he lay in a hospital bed.
During Gacey's late teens, he suffered some turmoil with his father, although relations with his mother and sisters were very strong. John Wayne Gacy Sr. was, as we said, an abusive alcoholic who physically abused his wife and verbally assaulted his children. Although John Sr. was an unpleasant individual, young Gacey deeply loved his father and desperately wanted to gain his devotion and attention. Unfortunately, he was never able to get very close to his father before he died, something which he regretted his entire life.
So we've got an abusive, in multiple senses of the word, childhood with withheld affection from a father figure
who would berate him for being possibly, as he said, queer, which as we'll see coming up, that John Wayne Gacy was, I would assume, gay.
Mm-hmm.
So for his father, who would then use that would also then make him hate the fact that he was gay.
Yeah. And he developed then a strong relationship with his mother,
Mm-hmm.
who he also saw being abused by his father.
Yeah.
And he saw that his relationship with his mother would then get him punished by his father.
Yes.
So yeah.
And obviously, because it says that he was molested when he was a child.
Yeah.
None of it condones anything that he does later on. But there are correlations between serial killers and the way they are brought up.
Yes.
That is a correlation between that.
Absolutely. You've got a lot of common denominators. So you've got like either an abusive family or an unhealthy or borderline unhealthy attachment to one or both parents, particularly with male serial killers, the mother.
Yeah.
You'll usually have an unusual relationship with death. So someone's died when they were quite young and they've had an unusual exposure to it. Mm-hmm. Some kind of sexual abuse quite often. And the head injury one is really interesting as well. But you'll also find things like some form of police or military career or upbringing or some sort of bearing of that in their lives.
And you can imagine his dad was a World War I vet.
Yeah.
So that would have deeply affected,
and the latent trauma that comes with that from his dad that would then pass to his son, as well as like the military. We don't know how long his father was in the military before that, or if he was just purely for the World War I drafted.
So it wasn't great.
He
didn't have great. So
a lot of red flags there.
Yeah, just a few.
So after attending 4 high schools in his senior year and never graduating, Gacey dropped out of school at the age of 18. He became involved in local politics, working as an assistant precinct captain for a local Democratic Party candidate. This led to more criticism for his father, who called him a patsy. So he can't do right for doing wrong.
No.
His father continued to have a huge control over his life, as in that same year, Gacey's father bought him a car.
Which was nice.
It was nice, but I can see why you could think of it as some form of control.
Yep.
He kept the vehicle's title in his own name until Gacey had paid for it, which took several years. His father would confiscate the keys if Gacey did not do as he said, hence the control element.
Yep.
In April 1962, Gacey purchased an extra set of keys, and in response, his father removed the distributor cap, keeping the component for 3 days, knowing that his son might not have the ability or knowledge to replace it. However, hours after his father replaced the cap, Gacey left home and drove to Las Vegas, Nevada, with $136 to his name in the hope of living there with a cousin.
So there was quite a lot of control with the car aspect. Yeah. While in Vegas, Gacey worked part-time as a janitor in a funeral parlor, performing odd jobs. He slept on a cot behind the embalming room, and he later confessed that one evening while he was alone, he clambered into a coffin of a teenage male, embracing and caressing the body before experiencing a sense of shock. And this experience kind of scared him to a point that it prompted Gacey to return back home.
And there's your unhealthy or unnatural experience with death.
Yep. And there's where it kind of started.
Yeah, it's like the Yorkshire Ripper was a gravedigger at one point. There's something there.
There is, yeah.
Soon after Gacy returned from Las Vegas in the early 1960s, he enrolled himself into a business college and he eventually graduated. Whilst in business school, he perfected his talent in salesmanship. Gacy was a born salesman who could talk his way in and out of almost anything. He put his talents to work when he was hired at his first job out of business school at the Nunn Bush Shoe Company. He excelled in his position as a management trainee, and it was not too long after his start with the company that he was transferred to manage a men's clothing outlet in Springfield, Illinois. So he was smarter than like his father gave him credit for, and like the school life gave him credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, Gacey joined the chapter of the JCs, which is the Junior Chamber of Commerce. It was a civic organisation for business and community leaders. That same year, however, he had his second homosexual experience, the first being the one in the coffin.
Yeah.
According to Gacey, a colleague in the JCs piled him with drinks and invited him to spend the evening on his sofa. The colleague then performed oral sex on him while he was drunk. And by 1965, Gacey had risen to the position of vice president of the Springfield JCs and was named the first most outstanding JC in the whole of Illinois.
I mean, even though he willingly went back with that person to their home, what happened was
not okay.
It was not okay. That was sexual assault.
It was.
So he's had two unusual homosexual experiences, which at the time would have been seen as deviant, like a deviant sexuality anyway. But he's done it in an unusual way, first with like the necrophilic tendency and then a sexual assault.
Yeah.
It's red flags, alarm bells, all kinds.
Yep, all of it.
While in Springfield, Gacey became involved in several organisations that served the community. The Cairo Club, where he was a membership chairman. The Catholic Interclub Council, where Gacey was member of the board. The Federal Civil Defence for Illinois.
1 second, you're really going to hear my cat purring. He's right by the mic. Why?
This is not a purring kind of one.
Not this one, Ron.
The Federal Civil Defence for Illinois, the Chicago Civil Defence, where Gacey was a commanding captain, the Holy Name Society, where he was named an officer, and the JCs, where Gacey devoted most of his time to, and eventually became first vice president and man of the year.
So he's putting himself right in the community.
Yeah.
So one of those, like, he would never do that.
Yeah.
He does all this lovely stuff. Why would he also then be a murderer?
He's great in society. He was probably charismatic as well. Which is a thing that a lot of psychopaths can be, and a lot of serial killers. I mean, look at the likes of Ted Bundy. Charismatic as hell.
Happening around the same time.
Yep.
America had Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacey round about the same time.
America has more serial killers per capita than anywhere else in the world. Massive population, though. So he was man of the year. He was also a member of the Chicago area Jolly Joker Clown Club and frequently performed in clown attire and makeup at children's parties, charity fundraisers, and other events as his alter egos, Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown. Years later, during a conversation with detectives whilst he was under surveillance, Gacey discussed his work as a clown, remarking, "Clowns can get away with murder." More on that one later.
And you wonder why people are scared of clowns, I'm just saying.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm not scared of clowns. I see a clown, it doesn't bother me, but I totally get why people would be.
It was during this time that Gacey's health again took a turn for the worse. He had gained a great deal of weight and he had begun to suffer more problems with this heart condition. Soon after, he was hospitalised for his heart. He was then again hospitalised for a spinal injury. His weight, heart, and back problems would plague Gacey for the rest of his life, yet that would not stop him from his work or other activities.
It was obvious that Gacey took his involvement in the community organisations very seriously, and he devoted most of his free time to them. Many knew who Gacey was at the time, considered him to be ambitious and eager, and I'll start that one again, shall I? Many who knew Gacy at this time considered him to be very ambitious and eager to make a name for himself in the community. He worked so hard that on one occasion he was hospitalized for nervous exhaustion. However, once again, he refused to let his health problems stand in the way of life and happiness.
In September of 1964, Gacy met and married a co-worker named Marilyn Myers, whose parents owned a string of KFC restaurant franchises in Waterloo, Iowa. Fred Myers, Gacy's new father-in-law, offered him a position with one of his franchises, and soon after that, Gacy and his new wife moved totally to Iowa. He began working for his father-in-law, learning the business from the ground up. On average, he worked for 12 hours a day. Yet it was not uncommon for him to work 14 or more hours in one day. He was enthusiastic and eager to learn, with hopes of one day taking over the string of fast food restaurants.
Gacy managed to find some time with his wife when not working for his father in law or doing volunteer work. Marilyn gave birth to a boy shortly after their move to Iowa, and soon after the birth of their son, they celebrated the birth of a daughter. The Gacy's had every reason to be happy during the first few years in Iowa. They had a nice house in the suburbs and a loving and healthy family. Marilyn enjoyed looking after the children, and John was happy at work and with the Jaycees. He was even working on a campaign for the presidency of the Jaycees. Everything seemed almost too good to be true, and indeed it was.
Everything seemed to be looking good for John Wayne Gacy, as we just said. Yet his lucky streak was not to last too much longer. Rumours were spreading around town and amongst the JC members regarding Gacy's sexual preferences, which in 1960s America wasn't a very good thing. It seemed that young boys were always in Gacy's presence. Everyone heard the stories that Gacy was a homosexual and made passes at the young boys who worked for him at the fast food franchises. Yet people close to him refused to believe in the gossip. Like we said, he was ingratiating himself with the community.
Yeah.
So when these things came out, people just didn't believe it. That was until May 1968 when rumours became truths.
In August 1967, Gacy sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees Jr., the son of Donald Edwin Voorhees, a local politician and fellow Jaycee. Gacy lured Voorhees to his house with the promise of showing him heterosexual stag films regularly played at Jaycee events. Gacy plied Voorhees with alcohol, allowing him to watch a stag movie, then persuaded him to engage in mutual oral sex, adding, "You have to have sex with a man before you start having sex with women." Over the following months, Gacy abused several other youths, including one whom he encouraged to have sex with his own wife before blackmailing him into performing oral sex on him. Gacy also tricked several teenagers into believing he was commissioned to conduct homosexual experiments for scientific research and paid them up to $50 each.
Yeah. In spring of 1968, Gacy was indicted by a grand jury in Black Hawk County for allegedly committing the act of sodomy with a teenage boy named Mark Miller. Miller told the courts that Gacy had tricked him into being tied up while visiting his home a year earlier and had violently raped him. Gacy denied all the charges against him and told a conflicting story, stating that Miller had willingly had sexual relations with him in order to earn extra money. Gacy further insisted that JC members opposed to him becoming president of the local chapter and was setting him up.
However, Miller's were not the only charges that Gacy would have to face. 4 months later, Gacy was charged with hiring an 18-year-old boy to beat up Mark Miller. Gacy offered Dwight Anderson $10 plus $300 more to pay off his car loan if he carried out the beating. Anderson lured Miller to his car and drove him to a wooded area where he sprayed mace in his eyes and began to beat him. Miller fought back and broke Anderson's nose and managed to break away and run to safety. Soon after, Miller called the police. Anderson was picked up and taken into police custody, where he gave Gacy's name as the man who hired him to perform the beating.
That doesn't scream innocent to me.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Gacy was arrested and a judge ordered him to undergo psychiatric evaluation at several mental health facilities to find out if he was mentally competent enough to stand trial. Upon evaluation, Gacy was found to be totally mentally competent. However, he was considered to be an antisocial personality who would probably not benefit from any known medical treatment. Soon after health authorities submitted the report, Gacy pleaded guilty to the charge of sodomy.
So basically, they've diagnosed that he has a problem, but basically said, well, we can't treat him, so he might as well just
Yeah.
go about his life.
Or they're saying that he's just got an antisocial personality. Like,
Yeah, like a personality
nothing else
disorder.
is really. There's nothing we can do to help because it's just
Yeah,
a thing. It wasn't serious enough.
yeah.
Yeah.
When the judge finally handed down the sentence, Gacey received 10 years at the Iowa State Reformatory for Men, the maximum time for such an offence. John Wayne Gacey Jr. was 26 years old when he entered prison for the first time. Shortly after Gacey entered prison, his wife divorced him on the grounds that Gacey violated their marriage vows.
He did just a tad.
Just a touch, yeah.
So, when I said that what ifs?
Yeah.
While in prison, Gacy adhered to all the rules and stayed far from trouble. He was a model prisoner, realizing that there was a high possibility of early parole if he had remained non-violent and well behaved.
Mm-hmm.
He was given 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Due to his model behavior, 18 months later, his hopes came true and he was let out on parole. On June 18th of 1970, Gacy left the confines of the prison gates and made his way back to his birthplace of Chicago. If only he had been kept in. Can you imagine if he'd been kept in for the 10 years?
The amount of times that with serial killers they have such a close call.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, if only.
And those were only the first offences, and unfortunately, he was only just getting started.
After being released from prison, Gacy moved back to Illinois with his mother and began working as a chef. After 4 months, he decided he wanted to live on his own, and with financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a house on 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, Illinois, where all of his future murders would take place.
In 1971, Gacy started a construction business called PDM Contractors, which stood for Painting, Decorating and Maintenance, which grew rapidly and became extremely financially successful. Also later that year, Gacy also became engaged to Carol Hoff, who he briefly dated in high school. The two were married in 1972. Most of the employees from PDM Contractors were high school students and young men who he would proposition for sex, sometimes under the threat of violence. Nevertheless, Gacy kept up a public front as a community man, hosting summer parties that were popular and well attended, especially by Poco or Patches the Clown. Through his membership in the local Moose Club, Gacy had become aware of the Jolly Joker Clown Club once again, whose members regularly performed at fundraising events and parades in addition to voluntarily entertaining hospitalized children. In the late 1975, Gacy joined the Clown Club and created his own characters, Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, devising his own makeup and costumes. He described Pogo as the happy clown, whereas Patches was the more serious character.
So once again, he's moved back home, but once again he's ingratiated himself into society, joining these clubs, building up this persona of like the clown, which is literally a mask, a face paint
Yeah.
to wear. Gacy seldom earned money for his performances and later said that acting as a clown allowed him to regress into childhood. He performed as both Pogo and Patches at numerous local parties, political functions, charitable events, and children's hospitals. That's another thing you find from people who had like a one or double parent abusive childhood, in that as they're an adult, they find a way to try and regress back into that childhood that they felt they never really had.
Yeah. In August of 1971, shortly after Gacy and his mother moved into the house, he became engaged to Carol Hoff, whom he had briefly dated in high school. Carol and her two daughters from a previous marriage moved into the house soon after. They married on July the 1st, 1972, and Gacy's mother moved out of the house shortly before the wedding.
By 1975, Gacy had told his wife that he was bisexual. After the couple had sex on Mother's Day that year, he informed her this would be the last time they would do so. He began spending most evenings away from home, only to return in the early morning with the excuse that he'd been working late or conducting business meetings. Carol observed Gacy bringing teenage boys into his garage in the early hours and also found gay pornography and men's wallets and identification inside the house. When she confronted Gacy about these items, he informed her angrily that it was none of her business. In October 1975, after a heated argument, Carol asked Gacey for a divorce. He agreed, although by mutual consent, she continued to live at his house until February 1976. On March 2nd, the Gacy's divorce decree on the false grounds of Gacey's infidelity with women was finalised.
When researching this, we didn't know whether or not to speak about every single murder, but I think missing anyone out would be a disservice.
Agreed.
They deserve to have their names known. Again, this list is harrowing and brutal, so if you want to skip, we absolutely will not be offended.
Yeah, so this is like your opportunity to switch off now.
Yep, or skip to
the end.
A few, yeah.
Yeah. Gacey's first known murder occurred on January 3rd, 1972. According to Gacey's later account, following a family party the previous evening, he drove to the Civic Centre in the Loop in the early morning to view a display of ice sculptures. He then lured 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal into his car. McCoy was on his way to his father's home in Omaha, Nebraska, and informed Gacey his bus was not due until noon. Gacey took McCoy on a sightseeing tour of Chicago and then drove him to his home with the promise that he could spend the remainder of the night and be driven back to the station in time to catch his bus. Gacey claimed he woke early the following morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom doorway holding a kitchen knife. He jumped from his bed and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, accidentally cutting Gacey's forearm. Gacey disarmed McCoy, banged his head against the bedroom wall and kicked him against his wardrobe. McCoy kicked Gacey in the stomach, doubling him over. Gacey then grabbed McCoy, wrestled him to the floor and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest.
As McCoy lay dying, Gacey claimed he washed the knife in his bathroom, then went to his kitchen and saw the makings of breakfast on the table. McCoy had set the table for two. He'd walked into Gacey's room to wake him while absent-mindedly just carrying the knife. Gacey buried McCoy in the crawl space and later covered his grave with a layer of concrete. In an interview several years later after his arrest, Gacey said that immediately after killing McCoy, he felt totally drained, yet noted that as he stabbed McCoy and listened to the gurgitations and gaspings, he experienced a mind-numbing orgasm and added that that's when I realised death was the ultimate thrill.
So if McCoy hadn't had the knife with him at that moment, could it have turned out differently?
Yeah, we don't know. And he was just making food to say thank you. Because there's nothing about saying that he, raped him or they did anything sexual.
Nope.
He just stayed there.
Gacey said that he committed murder for the second time around January 1974. This poor victim remains unidentified. He was strangled and placed in Gacey's closet before burial. Gacey later stated that bodily fluids leaked from the victim's mouth and nose, staining his carpet. Gacey regularly stuffed rags, the victim's own underwear, or a sock into the mouths of subsequent victims to prevent such a leakage.
So he's kind of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. On July the 31st, 1975, John Bolkovich, an 18-year-old PDM employee, disappeared. Bolkovich's car was later found abandoned with his jacket and wallet inside, and the keys were in the ignition.
The day before his disappearance, Butkovich had confronted Gacey over outstanding back pay. Butkovich's father called Gacey, who claimed he was happy to help search for his son, but was sorry Butkovich had run away. When questioned by the police, Gacey said Butkovich and two friends had arrived at his house demanding the overdue pay, but they had reached a compromise and all three had left. Over the following 3 years, Butkovich's parents called police more than 100 times, urging them to investigate Gacey further.
Gacey later admitted to encountering Butkovich existing in his car, waving to attract his attention. According to Gacey, Butkovich approached him stating, "I want to talk to you." Gacey then invited him into his car and back to his house to settle the issue of the overdue wages. At his home, Gacey offered him a drink, then conned him into allowing his wrist to be cuffed behind his back. Gacey later confessed to having sat on the kid's chest for a while before he strangled him. He stowed Butkovich's body in the garage, intending to bury it later in the crawl space. When his wife and stepdaughters returned home earlier than expected, Gacey buried Butkovich under the concrete floor of the tool room extension on his garage in an empty space where he had intended to dig a drain tile.
By the middle of the 1970s, two more young men accused Gacey of rape, and he was questioned by police about the disappearances of others. Gacey refers to this period of his life as his cruising years, when he committed most of his murders. Most of his victims were buried on the property, with several placed in a common grave underneath his crawl space.
So we start in 1976. These are the cruising years. 1 month after his divorce was finalised, Gacey abducted and murdered 18-year-old Daryl Sampson, who was last seen alive in Chicago on April the 6th, 1976. Gacey buried him under the dining room with a cloth lodged in his throat. On May 14th, 15-year-old Randall Ruffett disappeared shortly after returning home from a dental appointment, hours after Ruffett was last seen by his family. 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton vanished as he walked home from his sister's apartment. He and Ruffett were close acquaintances. They were buried together in the crawl space, and investigators believe the two were murdered the same evening.
So once he started, you'll then start to see an escalation in it will get less frequent between, like, the gaps between them.
Yeah, and then as his wife had moved out and the divorce happened, there was no one at the house to stop him.
Exactly.
He could literally bring anyone back at any time.
Yeah, there was no tempering force there.
No.
And the more, like, people would start to question as well, you probably start to see more of an escalation.
Yeah.
On June 3rd, Gacey killed 17-year-old Michael Bonin, who disappeared while travelling from Chicago to Waukegan. Gacey strangled Bonin with a ligature and buried him under the spare bedroom. 10 days later, Gacey murdered 16-year-old William Carroll and buried him in a common grave in the crawl space. Carroll seems to have been the first of 4 victims known to have been murdered between June 13th and August 6th, 1976. They were between 16 and 17-year-olds, and one unidentified victim appears to have been an adult.
So he didn't kind of favour any certain ages. They just weren't. Most of them were quite young.
Yeah,
I guess because he wanted to have that sense of power.
That sense of power, also that youth as well, to be around them and, like, the sexual delight of it. But they would potentially be easier to overcome than, like, a fully grown male.
Yeah. On August the 5th, 16-year-old James Hankerson is last known to have phoned his family, possibly from Gacey's home. Hankerson died of suffocation. His body was buried in the crawl space beneath 17-year-old Rick Johnston, who was last seen alive on August the 6th.
Gacey is thought to have murdered 2 unidentified males between August and October 1976. On 24th of October, Gacey abducted and killed teenage friends Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. The two were last seen on Clark Street in Chicago. 2 days later, 19-year-old construction worker William Bundy disappeared after informing his family he was to attend a party. Bundy died of suffocation. Gacey buried the body beneath his master bedroom, and Bundy had apparently worked for Gacey.
Between November and December 1976, Gacey murdered 21-year-old Francis Alexander. His last contact with his family was a phone call to his mother sometime in November. He was not reported missing, as his family believed he had moved to California shortly thereafter. Alexander was buried beneath the room Gacey used as his office.
In December 1976, 17-year-old Gregory Godzik disappeared. His girlfriend last saw him outside her house. Godzik had worked for PDM for less than 3 weeks when he disappeared. He informed his family that Gacey had him dig trenches for some kind of drain tiles in his crawl space. So he's basically digging his own grave.
Mm-hmm.
Godzik's car was later found abandoned. His parents and older sister contacted Gacey about Godzik's disappearance. Gacey claimed that Godzik had expressed a wish to run away from home. He also claimed to have received an answering machine message from Godzik shortly after he disappeared. When asked if he could play the message for Godzik's parents, Gacey said he had erased it.
So that was just 1976.
Yep.
All of those murders. So now, 1977. On January the 20th, Gacey lured 19-year-old John Syke.
I think it's Schick.
Apologies if I say it wrong. I do that. To his house on the pretext of buying his Plymouth Satellite. He later confessed to strangling Syke in the spare bedroom, claiming Rossi was asleep in the house the following morning. Rossi is another person who worked for him. Gacey later sold this car to Rossi for $300.
2 months later, on March 15th, 20-year-old John Prestige disappeared. Prestige was last seen leaving a near North Side restaurant. He was buried in the crawl space above the body of Francis Alexander. Shortly before his disappearance, Prestige had mentioned he had obtained work with a local contractor. Gacey murdered one additional unidentified youth and buried him in the crawl space in the spring or early summer of 1977. On 5th July, Gacey killed 19-year-old Matthew Bowman. Bowman's mother last saw him at a suburban train station. He'd intended to travel to Harwood Heights for a court appointment.
The following month, Rossi was arrested for stealing gas while driving Senink's car. The gas station attendant noted the license plate and police traced the car to Gacey's house. When questioned, Gacey told officers that Zike, as you'd known Gacey had murdered him before, had sold the car to him in February, saying he needed the money to leave town. A check on the VIN number confirmed the car that did belong to Zike. The police did not pursue the matter any further, although they did inform Zike's mother that her son had sold his car. So he was in the police's sights then, again.
And you got a lot of people that have gone missing, and this common denominator is that they worked for PDM.
Yeah.
By the end of 1977, Gacey had murdered 6 more young men between the ages of 16 and 21. The first of these was 18-year-old Robert Gilroy, the son of a Chicago police sergeant, last seen alive on September 15th. Gilroy lived 4 blocks from Gacey's house. He was buried in the crawl space. On September 12th, Gacey had flown to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to supervise a remodeling project and did not return to Chicago until September 16th. Because Gacey was in another state at the time Gilroy was last seen, this is cited to support Gacey's claim of assistance from one or more accomplices in several homicides. 10 days after Gilroy was last seen, 19-year-old former US Marine John Mowry disappeared after leaving his mother's house. Gacey strangled Mowry and buried his body beneath the master bedroom.
So he killed a police sergeant's son.
Yeah.
He is
he's getting ballsy.
He is.
But a lot of serial killers will do that at some point because they'll develop like a self-destructive tendency in that they'll start to get deliberately reckless.
Yeah.
Or they'll do something like that because they kind of, it's not that they want to be stopped, it's that, well, I suppose in a way they do kind of want to be stopped.
Yeah.
Insofar as they want anything. But yeah, the idea that he had accomplices as well is interesting.
Yeah. On October 17th, 21-year-old Russell Nelson disappeared. He was last seen outside a Chicago bar. Nelson was looking for contracting work. Gacey murdered and buried him beneath the guest bedroom. Less than 4 weeks later, Gacey murdered 16-year-old Robert Winch and buried him in the crawlspace. 21-year-old Tommy Boiling disappeared on November the 18th after leaving a Chicago bar. And on December the 9th, 19-year-old US Marine David Talsma disappeared after telling his mother he was to attend a rock concert in Hammond, Indiana. Gacey strangled Talsma with a ligature and buried him in the crawlspace close to John Mowry.
Okay, so how much space has he got left in this crawl space now?
Not very much.
But also, I doubt, because of the building's foundations, I doubt he would have been able to bury them deeply enough to stop the smell.
Yeah.
On December 30th, I mean, it's winter at this point, so he's got that grace.
Yeah.
On December 30th, Gacey abducted 19-year-old college student Robert Donnelly from a Chicago bus stop at gunpoint. Gacey drove him to his home, where he raped, tortured, and repeatedly drowned Donnelly to unconsciousness in a bathtub, as he made statements such as, "Aren't we playing fun games tonight?" Donnelly later testified at trial that he was in such pain that he asked Gacey to kill him. Gacey replied, "I'm getting round to it." After several hours, Gacey drove Donnelly to his workplace and released him, warning that if he complained to the police, they would not believe him. So there again, that's a self-destructive tendency in that he's
letting someone go.
He's letting him go. And basically saying, don't you dare go to the police, knowing full well that he probably would.
Yeah. Yep, so that was 1977. So now we're in 1978. Donnelly of course, reported this assault, and police questioned Gacey on January the 6th, 1978. Gacey admitted to having a slave sex relationship with Donnelly, but insisted everything was consensual, adding that he didn't pay the kid the money he had promised him. The police believed him and filed no charges.
Upstanding member of the community.
The
He's got that alibi.
yeah. The following month, Gacey killed 19-year-old William Kindred, who disappeared on February 16th after telling his fiancée, who knew Gacey, that he was going to a bar. Kindred was the final victim to be buried in the crawl space.
On 21st of March, Gacey lured 26-year-old Jeffrey Rignall into his car. Gacey chloroformed him and drove him to his house, where his arms and head were restrained in a pillory device affixed to the ceiling, and his feet locked into another device. So he had the ability to get these devices ready.
Mhm.
This is what he can do when he's not being supervised at home.
Mm-hmm.
He raped and tortured Rignall with instruments, including lit candles and whips, and repeatedly chloroformed him into unconsciousness. Gacey then dumped Rignall in Chicago's Lincoln Park, unconscious but alive. Rignall managed to stagger to his girlfriend's apartment. Police were informed of the assault but did not investigate Gacey. Rignall was able to recall the Oldsmobile, the Kennedy Expressway, and particular side streets. He and two friends staked out the Cumberland exit of the expressway, and in April, Rignall saw the Oldsmobile, which he and his friends followed to 8213 West Somerdale. Gacey was arrested on July 15th. He faced trial for assault and battery against Rignall.
This is kind of what happened with the Bundy thing at the same time, was that police did not speak to each other.
Yeah.
So they would have thought this was the only thing that Gacey had ever done.
Yeah.
Because they didn't speak to the other people, to the other people, to the other people.
Yeah, it wasn't tying up at all.
No. By mid-1978, the crawl space had no room for further bodies. Gacey later confessed to police that he considered stowing bodies in his attic, but had been worried about complications arising from leakage. Therefore, he chose to dispose of his victims off the I-55 bridge in the Des Plaines River. Gacey stated he had thrown 5 bodies into that river in 1978, one of which he believed had landed on a passing barge. Only 4 were ever found.
It's that dehumanization of the victims.
Yeah.
Like, they blame the victims, also they dehumanize them. It's like, oh, I've got no more space for these things.
Yeah.
I can't put it in here. Oh, I'm worried about leakage. Not that you have a former human person
Yep.
up there, but you have something that could cause complications in your house because it might leak.
Mm-hmm.
The first known victim thrown from the bridge was 20-year-old Timothy O'Rourke. He was murdered in mid-June after leaving his apartment to purchase cigarettes. Shortly before his disappearance, O'Rourke had told his roommate a contractor on the northwest side had offered him a job.
On November the 4th, Gacey killed 19-year-old Frank Landingrunt. He was last seen alive by his father walking along Foster Avenue. His naked body was found close to an inlet in the Des Plaines River by 2 duck hunters on November the 12th. On November 24th, 20-year-old James Mazzara disappeared after Thanksgiving dinner with his family. Mazzara had informed his sister the day before that he was working in construction. He was last seen walking in the direction of Bughouse Square.
Now we come to the last murder.
Yep.
On the afternoon of December 11th, 1978, Gacey visited the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines to discuss a potential remodeling deal with the store owner, Phil Torf. While he was within earshot of 15-year-old part-time employee Robert Peast, Gacey mentioned his firm often hired teenage boys at a starting wage of $5 per hour, which is almost double the pay that Peast earned at the pharmacy.
Shortly after Gacey left, Peast's mother arrived at the store to drive her son home so the family could celebrate her birthday together. Peast asked his mother to wait, adding that some contractor wants to talk to me about a job. He left the store at 9 p.m. and promised to return shortly.
Oh, his mother's birthday. Peast was murdered shortly after 10 p.m. at Gacey's home. Gacey later stated that at his house he gave Peast a soft drink before asking whether there was anything he wouldn't do for the right price, to which Peast replied that he did not mind working hard. In response, Gacey stated good money could be earned by hustling, although Peast was dismissive. Gacey then duped Peast into donning handcuffs. Gacey's subsequent statements regarding the events varied, although in one of his initial statements, he claimed Peast failed to resist as he removed the boy's trousers. He also stated that as he placed the rope around Peast's neck, the boy was crying, scared. Gacey admitted to receiving a phone call from a business acquaintance as Peast lay dying.
So he just didn't care.
No, there's no emotion there.
Yeah. Peast's family filed a missing persons report with the police, which led finally to a search of Gacey's house in Norwood Park. On December the 13th, police entered John Wayne Gacey's house on Somerdale Drive. He was not home during this investigation. Inspector Colts was in charge of taking inventory of any recovered evidence that might be found at the house. Some of the items on his list that were confiscated from Gacey's house were a jewelry box containing 2 driving licenses and several rings, which including one had engraved on it the name Maine West High School, class of 1975, and the initials JAS.
Something very identifying.
Yeah.
A box containing marijuana and rolling papers.
7 erotic movies made in Sweden.
Pills including amyl nitrate and Valium.
A switchblade knife.
A stained section of rug.
Colour photographs of pharmacies and drugstores.
An address book.
A scale.
Books such as Tight Teenagers, The Rights of Gay People, Bike Boy, Pederasty, Sex Between Men and Boys, 21 Abnormal Sex Cases, and The American.
Bicentennial Gay Guide, Heads and Tails, and The Great Swallow.
A pair of handcuffs with keys.
A 3-foot-long 2x4 wooden plank with 2 holes drilled in each end.
A 6mm Italian pistol with possible gun caps.
Police badges.
An 18-inch rubber dildo was also found in the attic beneath insulation.
A hypodermic syringe and needle and a small brown bottle.
Clothing that was much too small for Gacey.
And a receipt for a roll of film with a serial number on it from Nissan's pharmacy.
And nylon rope.
One of those things would probably be a kind of a bit of a red flag, but they were all completely found in his house at the first investigation.
Yep. Further into the investigation, police entered the crawl space located beneath Gacey's home. The first thing that struck investigators was a rancid odour that they believed to be sewage. The earth in the crawl space was sprinkled with lime, which chloride of lime I would be a good way to try and get rid of it, but there was nothing that could get rid of that smell.
No.
It seemed to have been untouched. Police found nothing else during their first search and eventually returned back to headquarters to run tests on some of the evidence to research the case more. So they probably just assumed that it was leaked sewage.
Yeah. Finally, after intense investigation and lab work into some of the items confiscated by police from Gacey's house, they came up with critical evidence against him. One of the rings found at Gacey's house belonged to another teenager who had disappeared a year earlier, named John Syke. They also discovered the 3 former employees of Gacey had also mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, the receipt for the roll of film that was found at Gacey's home had belonged to a co-worker of Robert Peast, who had given it to Robert the day of his disappearance. With this new information, investigators began to realise the enormity of the case that was unfolding before them.
The moment they would have put 2 and 2 together, you can't imagine that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
So what have we got on our hands? It was not long before investigators were back searching Gacey's house. Gacey had finally confessed to police that he did kill someone, but he said it had been in self-defense. He said that he had buried the body underneath his garage. Gacey told police where they could find the body, and police marked the gravesite in the garage, but they did not immediately begin digging. They first wanted to search the crawl space under Gacey's house. It was not long before they discovered a suspicious mound of earth. Minutes after digging into the suspicious mound, investigators found the remains of a body, but it was only the beginning.
On the evening of December the 20th, Gacey drove to his lawyer's office in Park Ridge to attend a scheduled meeting. So he said it was to discuss the progress of his civil suit, the one that was against him for the possible rape and torture. Gacey appeared anxious and dishevelled and immediately asked for an alcoholic drink. Sam Amorite, who was one of his lawyers, fetched a bottle of Seagram's whiskey, and Gacey immediately drank 2 huge cupfuls. Amarante, by this stage, was dubious of Gacey's claims of innocence. He then asked if he had anything he wanted to discuss with them, placing a copy of the Daily Herald newspaper on his desk and stating, "You said you had something new to tell me, something important?" Gacey picked up the newspaper, pointed to the front page article covering the disappearance of Peast, and said, "This boy is dead. He's dead. He's in the river."
Gacey then proceeded to give a rambling confession that ran into the early hours of the following morning. He began by stating that he had been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. Those were his own words. And that he now wanted to be the same for himself. He stated he had murdered at least 30 victims, most of whom he had buried in his crawl space, and had disposed of 5 other bodies in the Des Plaines River. Gacey dismissed his victims as male prostitutes, hustlers, and liars, adding he sometimes awoke to find dead, strangled kids with their hands cuffed behind their back. He'd buried their bodies in his crawl space as he believed they were his property. So he's not only kind of dehumanizing the victims, he's also dissociating himself from the murders, saying that he woke up and they were dead.
Yeah, he does that more later on.
Yeah.
On Friday, December the 22nd, 1978, Gacey finally confessed to police that he had killed at least 30 people and buried most of the remains of the victims beneath the crawl space of his house. By the end of February, police were still digging at Gacey's property. They had already gutted the house and were unable to find any more bodies in the crawl space.
While workmen were breaking up the concrete of Gacey's patio, they came across another horrific discovery. They found the body of a man still in good condition preserved in the concrete. The man wore a pair of blue jeans, shorts, and a wedding ring. Gacey's victims no longer included just young boys or suspected homosexuals, but now also married men. The following week, another body was discovered.
The 31st body to be found, Lint Gacey, was in the Illinois River. Investigators were able to discover the identity of the young man by a Tim Lee tattoo on one of his arms. A friend of the victim's father had recognized the Tim Lee tattoo while reading a newspaper story about the discovery of a body in the river. The victim's name was Timothy O'Rourke, who had said he was such a fan of Bruce Lee that he took the Kung Fu Master's last name and added it to his own name in a tattoo. Unfortunately, among the 32 bodies that were discovered, that of Robert Peast was still accounted for. He was still missing. That was until February of 1979, when the remains of Robert Peast were discovered in the Illinois River.
On Wednesday, 6th of February 1980, John Wayne Gacey's murder trial began in the Cook County Criminal Courts building in Chicago, Illinois. At the request of his defense counsel, Gacey spent over 300 hours with doctors at the Maynard Correctional Center in Chester the year before his trial. He underwent a variety of psychological tests to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. Gacey attempted to convince the doctors that he had multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder. He claimed to have 4 personalities: the hard-working, civic-minded contractor, the clown, the active politician, and a policeman called Jack Hanley, whom he referred to as Bad Jack. When Gacey had confessed to police, he claimed to be relaying the crimes of Jack, who detested homosexuality and viewed male prostitutes as weak, stupid, and degraded scum. His lawyers opted to have Gacey plead not guilty by reasons of insanity. Not too much of a shock there.
Yeah, so you were saying how he was like disassociating himself from it. He massively did that by trying to say it was a different personality who did it.
Yeah, No, if it was true, it's fascinating enough. But if it's not true, he's clearly figuring that as a way to sort of reduce his own culpability by saying, I was not in my right mind. It wasn't me doing this.
Yeah. Gacey pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. That was a defense. He was insane. And he went on trial for 33 separate murder charges. The prosecution argued Gacey was sane and in control of his actions, pointing to the elaborate steps Gacey took to both prepare for and conceal the murders.
Valid point.
The chief prosecutor, William Knuckles, said, "These were certainly the acts of a man capable of premeditation, acting in his own best interest under duress, and recollecting the details of all criminal activities." The reason why we know so much about a lot of the murders is because Gacey recounted the details.
Which is similar to like what Dennis Nielsen did.
Yeah.
In that you just, it was almost I mean, for Nielsen, it was a relief at the time. He was like, you know what, I finally get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
But for some serial killers, it's bragging rights.
Yeah.
And for other ones, it's like, it's that relief, it's getting it off the chest, that you might as well. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 50 minutes. Gacey was found guilty of 33 charges of murder. He was also found guilty of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child, both in reference to Robert Peast. At the time, his conviction for 33 murders was the most for which any person in US history has been convicted. In fact, we have to say at the time.
That's because Ted Bundy was later.
Yep.
In the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury deliberated for more than 2 hours before sentencing Gacey to death for each murder committed. So he was sentenced to 33 death penalties. It was after the Illinois statute on capital punishment came into effect on June 1977, and his execution date was set for June 2nd, 1980.
Gacey was imprisoned at the Maynard Correctional Centre in Chester for 14 years, appealing the sentence and offering contradictory statements on the murders in interviews. So he couldn't keep his story straight.
No.
Although he had previously confessed, Gacey later denied being guilty of the charges and had a 900 telephone number set up with a 12-minute recorded statement declaring his innocence. While at Maynard, Gacey took up studying the visual arts, especially painting. His paintings were shown to the public via an exhibition at a Chicago gallery. Many of his paintings depicted Gacey as Pogo the Clown. In 2017, Mullock's Auctions in Shropshire, United Kingdom, auctioned off several of Gacey's artworks, as well as crime scene pictures from Gacey's trial. That's a very, very niche kind of person that collects that. You've got that, and was it Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker? He did art as well.
Yeah, and a lot of museums buy them. There's this new serial killer museum opened in London.
Yes.
That has a few of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. In mid-1984, the Supreme Court of Illinois upheld Gacey's conviction and ordered his execution by lethal injection by that year of 1984 on November the 14th. Gacey filed an appeal against this decision, which was denied by the Supreme Court of the United States on March the 4th, 1985. So he keeps on appealing.
Yeah.
The following year, Gacey filed a further post-conviction petition seeking a new trial. His then defense lawyer, Richard King, argued that Gacey had been provided with ineffective legal counsel on his 1980 trial, and this petition was dismissed on September 11th, 1986.
Oh, yeah, so he's got ineffective legal counsel who absolutely made him confess to all of these 33 murders.
Absolutely.
Gacey appealed the 1985 decision that he be executed. The Illinois Supreme Council upheld his conviction on September 29, 1988, setting a new execution date of January the 11th, 1989. After the US Supreme Court denied Gacey's final appearance in October 1993, the Illinois Supreme Court formally set an execution date for May 10th, 1994.
Which I don't know. I didn't realise that we had been born when John Wayne Gacey was still alive.
Yeah, I was literally 6 days old when he got that appeal trial.
Yeah.
It's insane. By that point, like, both of, like, my brother and your older sister had been born as well.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. So, on the morning of May 9th, 1994, which is 11 days before my sister would be born, Gacey was transferred to Stateville Correctional Centre to be executed. That afternoon, he was allowed a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family. For his last meal, Gacey ordered a bucket of KFC, which is a bit of a callback to when he used to manage the franchises.
Yeah.
French fries, a dozen fried shrimp, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. That evening, he received the last rites from a Catholic priest before being escorted to the Stateville execution chamber.
I mean, soul-wise, if you believe the Catholic idea of souls and everything, I get that everybody they believe that everybody can ask for absolution with the last rites and everything. But in this kind of case, if you believe in hell, that is very much firmly closing the stable door after the horse has well and truly
Oh,
bolted.
absolutely. In the hours leading up to Gacy's execution, a crowd estimated at over 1,000 people gathered outside the correctional centre. A vocal majority were in favour of the execution, although there was a small number of anti death penalty protesters that were present. Some of those in favour of the execution wore t shirts that had Gacy's previously community services as a clown, bearing slogans such as "No tears for this clown."
According to the published reports, Gacy was a diagnosed psychopath who did not express any remorse for his crimes, which we can kind of guess from his way of like dehumanizing them, calling them prostitutes, etc. His final statement to his lawyer before his execution was that killing him would not compensate for the loss of others, and that the state was murdering him. I somehow don't think the families would have seen it that way.
Yeah, not a little bit.
His final spoken words were reported to be, "Kiss my ass." Although prosecutor William Kunkel stated in 2020 that these words were spoken to a prison official and were not part of any official statement prior to Gacy's execution.
But he did say it, but it wasn't his last words.
It's not recorded as his last words.
Yeah. After Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May the 10th, 1994, his brain was removed. It is in the possession of Helen Morrison, a witness for the defense at Gacy's trial, who had interviewed Gacy and other serial killers in attempts to isolate common personality traits of violent sociopaths. He was cremated, and the whereabouts of his ashes have remained disclosed.
Yeah, they don't want people as much as he as much what he did. They don't want people going and desecrating his grave.
But also, there will be people
that would collect
and feel sorry for him.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people that are like that's like who will have supporters.
Yes,
which is disgusting, but he will have, and that he doesn't deserve to be worshipped either.
No. But it's interesting to know that his brain is out there,
Yeah,
and has been studied, which I would be interested to see, because like obviously we know that there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. I would be interested to see if there's any kind of physical like effects or malformations for a psychosociopath compared to a non-psychosociopath. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
In the years since Gacy's arrest, there have been lingering concerns that Gacy might have been responsible for the deaths of other people whose bodies have yet to be found, which is highly likely.
Mm-hmm.
And when police uncovered human remains in Gacy's house in 1978, 8 bodies couldn't be identified. In July 2017, Cook County authorities used DNA evidence to identify one of these victims as 16-year-old James Jimmy Byron Harkinson, who had been reported missing since 1976. In October 2021, DNA testing identified another of Gacy's victims as 21-year-old Francis Wayne Alexander, who also disappeared in 1976. 5 bodies still remain unidentified. I mean, if they were people from out of town, then they'd be looking in local gene pools, and it would only be recently, and not even to a full extent now, that police forces would discuss interstate.
Yeah.
And that's provided they're even American, if there was some sort of migrant, so migrant workers.
Yeah, people who are in the country illegally, there'd be no record of them.
Yep. They'd be picked out. And that's provided that he didn't do anything to the bodies afterwards, and there is actually usable DNA.
It's also been 50, 40 years.
Yeah, and it will degrade.
So that was John Wayne Gacy.
Yep. Thing is, he's not the worst serial killer that was out there.
No.
But he is... I mean, no serial killer is... There's no such thing as a good serial killer.
Well, no.
But he was... Yeah.
Yeah. 33 people over 4 years. But the years he killed the people were supposed to be the ones he was in prison for when he got his 10-year sentence.
Yeah. That's not to say if he had got a 10-year sentence.
Yeah, it's not to say he wouldn't have come out and done it.
But also, he might not have done.
Mm-hmm.
He might not have had the opportunity afterwards.
And those 33 wouldn't have been killed. Yes, if he had gone on and killed people, they would have been different.
Yeah.
But getting a 10-year sentence being let out after 18 months,
Mm-hmm.
that's ridiculous.
For something like what he did, yeah. Yeah, the homosexuality, don't agree that he should have been arrested for it. Not
Well, no, but it was a law back then.
it was a law back then, but the sexual assault, etc., absolutely. He should have been kept in for that. And there's so many, as I said before, there's so many close calls with serial killers and so many what ifs.
Yeah.
And you think, if only the police had picked up on this, or if only they'd asked that question, or if only they'd not done that. Like one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims was able to escape,
Yeah.
weren't they? And Dahmer brought him back and said to the police, "Oh yeah, he's my boyfriend. He's just a bit drunk," and the police believed him, and then he killed him. It's like, if the police had actually believed the kid and not Dahmer.
Yeah.
Or if the police had talked to one another about Gacey, or if someone had reported missing and they'd be like, well, hang on a second, this kid's missing and he works for this constructors. That kid was missing and they also worked for that constructors as well. Should we probably ask a few questions?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that one's heavy.
It is. And you'll notice we're not doing our usual segment of a ridiculous death in this case.
Yeah, after researching 33 murders, I didn't want to look at any more.
No. But we wanted to present it in a way that we wanted to present you with the facts, but and you did the research for this, and I 100% agree, because we did the same thing with Jack the Ripper. We wanted to give the victims their names, and I believe we should do that.
Because they were people.
Yeah, they were people, and the killers go to such lengths to dehumanize them and strip that humanity away from them.
Yeah.
But what I also find interesting is he's John Wayne Gacey, but he's also known as the Killer Clown. So you've got like the Killer Clown, the Night Stalker, Jack the Ripper. It
gives them notoriety, which a lot of serial killers want.
It gives them notoriety, but it also dehumanizes them and separates them from humanity.
Yeah.
So if I say to you John Wayne Gacey, he's a person, an actual, like someone you could walk past in the street. But if I say to you the Killer Clown,
yeah,
he's other. He's something separate. And I find the psychology behind that really interesting. Just creating that other and removing them from that uncanny valley, that uncomfortable closeness.
It's because humans don't want to believe that other humans could be so horrid. Yeah. So by kind of being like, he's not like you, he's this thing, it makes it easier for the average Joe to accept that it's something different.
It's easier to accept that there are monsters out there rather than accepting that the monster is in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, who is the real monster, the supernatural one or the natural one, is a question that we'll actually be posing in a podcast that we'll be doing in a couple of weeks' time, which with an interesting outcome.
Yes. And it's a supernatural quote, wasn't there? In the supernatural episode.
Ghost monsters I get, but people, they scare me.
Yeah.
So something along those lines. Dean Winchester said it way better than I could.
Oh yeah, Jensen Ackles would.
Yeah. So
yeah, that was a bit different to what we normally do.
It is a bit, but we have said before that we'll deal with history and we'll deal with the dark stuff as well. And this is history, and it's one of those things to learn from, because people like this are still out there. Anyone with these kind of traits and upbringings has the capacity to be like this.
But it is also a lot harder. I don't think anyone would be able to get away with killing that many people over that time scale anymore.
Depends on where you are. Somewhere like the UK might be difficult. Somewhere
but even in America, they have systems now, and police, like central systems.
Yeah,
where all police
central intelligence.
That's it. Yeah, and all police stations in all the states, they're all linked. So that if you put a name in, and it'll pop up if anyone else has put that name in any other state.
It would be difficult. It's not impossible, but it would be very, very difficult. But there are still parts of the world where that would very much still be possible. And no one will bat an eyelid, especially if you're an upstanding member of society. No one will bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can get away with if you blag.
He was a good salesman.
He was indeed. But yeah, so we're happy to do this, and this is obviously Spooky Month. So we're back with something a little bit
Yeah,
lighter.
Yeah,
next week.
the rest of our spooky ones are lighter. They are.
But we wanted to do this one, and we might do other serial killers in the future because we've done Jack the Ripper, we've done Gilles de Rais.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we should in future, just because they're a part of our history too.
Yes. And there is a lot of interest in the macabre and serial killers and stuff at the moment.
Yeah,
Um,
they're an example of when the human brain goes really wrong,
yeah.
which I find fascinating. But it's a very dark rabbit hole to fall down.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah. So we're going to go and have a cup of tea,
A glass of wine.
Yep. Probably one in each hand, and try to pull ourselves out of this. And we recommend that you kind of detox from this as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, just pull yourself away from this, as we say, dark rabbit hole.
Definitely. It's a rabbit hole that one does not want to find oneself. There's a lot more as well that I could have included.
Yes. Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, but yeah.
Heavy.
Caveat. So we shall see you next time for more of Spooky Month, and thank you for
Yes.
sticking with us.
Yes.